Yo, yo, what's going on, guys? Hope everybody's having a great day today. So, in today's video, we're going to be talking about writing good documentation. As a software engineer, you should always be writing great documentation. One of the things that has helped me progress in my career is actually writing out a feature that I'm building, create good documentation on it, how we're going to implement it, what are the impacts, and you don't have to worry about all these other questions that other people that are stakeholders involved with this process have to tear apart your documentation and ask other questions or add more requirements to your load, right? So at least documenting what you're going to be building saves you a lot of time, gets a lot of the questions out there. So like the more you think about solving that problem and what the feature is going to be doing, the easier it will be for you to build that feature in the long run. The impacts are going to be minimal as well. So if you already understand the code and the project itself that you're working on, it should be easy enough for you to document all of the important aspects of that feature. Even if the product managers or the stakeholders they give you the underlying requirements, you could think above that and actually write out good documentation that will open the door for more questions and it will actually help you be more successful with building this feature in the long run, right? So here I got two examples, right? We got one, the left side is bad documentation. And then you also got the right side, which is good documentation. And the difference between the two is entry level, junior level documentation versus senior tech lead level, someone that actually um, goes through the code, understands the project, understands the requirements, dissect those requirements, and figure out what's in scope, what's out of scope, etc. Okay, so let's talk about bad documentation. And let me just actually zoom in here. So, bad documentation is something like this. And you could say if you're building, say, for example, if you're setting up a story for a feature, this is something that you could work off of. But if you're trying to propose this to like an actual team itself, it's not going to work. All right. The documentation that we have here is around password reset. So when you're on a login form, and say, for example, a user is to attempt to log in, but they can't because they forgot their password or they have issues with their login, they can easily click on forgot password, go through the steps of resetting their password and logging into their account. And there's so many different things that you have to take into consideration when thinking about a forgot password flow. So here you could see the overview, which is, let me change over to my laser pointer. This feature lets users reset their password. Very simple, right? How it works: user clicks forgot password, enters their email, system sends an email, user clicks the link, user sets a new password. Pretty straightforward, right? But when you look at this, you could create a story around implementing this, but you don't necessarily know what the next steps are. What is the flow of forgot password? What's going to happen? And documenting the API routes helps because it helps you as a developer understand, okay, this is my route that I need to call. And then it kicks off that workflow. But what does that workflow entail? Like, what does this API route entail for forgot and reset? What happens there, right? This doesn't give us any context. If you're proposing this, you're going to be given a lot of questions around how this works. Implementation notes, this is only for a developer to know. You don't really need to propose this, but the implementation notes is generate a token and store it. Where are you storing the token at, right? Send the email, okay? Validate the token when resetting, and then update the password. This is something that I would write if I would write it in pseudocode so that I could figure out what the next steps are and then expand on these different actions. So if I'm able to do that, I'm easily able, like as a senior engineer, I could understand this. But if you're trying to propose this to someone else, they're not gonna know what the process is. And like there's going to be more questions around the security around those tokens, when you need to refresh it. Is it a one-time token? You know what I'm saying? A lot of these things are going to come up. And then you look at your to-do, this is only for a dev. This is not for like a product manager or stakeholder. You know what I'm saying? Add rate limiting. Okay, how do you implement that rate limiting? Add logging, improve security later. These are not good requirements that will define what the password reset feature is. This will be notes that you would follow to build this feature. But like I said, this having it vague like this, you're gonna be asked more questions. You're probably not gonna know the answers to those questions because you didn't really do the research around what you're gonna be implementing. And there's gonna be a lot of broken trust around whether you could do this feature or not. So this is why I advocate on my channel that junior devs, entry level devs, you need to get comfortable with writing good documentation. You need to get comfortable with being uncomfortable to then understanding the problem and building out a better solution. And this takes reps to do this. I'm not saying that you're going to get this overnight, but you have to understand like this is something that I would personally write just to understand what the flow is going to be, and then I can expand on this and actually write good documentation. This is my notes, honestly. And then I could take these notes and create documentation on it and propose how this feature is going to work. Okay? So never do it like this to where it's vague because people are going to ask questions. Now, good documentation, usually a senior tech lead, architect, will provide good documentation and explain what the feature is in plain text and then dive into like more of the technical aspect of it. Okay. So look at the description. Let me zoom out here. Look at the description for the bad documentation here. Very vague, right? Reset their password if they forget it. Now look at good documentation, like how you should be defining the summary of this feature. All users to securely recover access to their account when they have forgotten their password without revealing whether an account exists for the given email. I know more about what this feature is going to be doing as opposed to this. Okay, so this tells me that when a user clicks on forgot password, they're going to go through the forgot password flow and we'll do all the checks on the back end, whether the account exists, whether we could send them a token to reset their password, whether if the password that they do set is actually within security standards. And if that's the case, then they should be able to log into their account. What's in scope based on your knowledge? Okay. Email based password reset using a one time token. All right. Token validation and password update. So, this is explaining what is in scope for this version of the password reset feature. Because if you don't add what's in scope, what's going to happen is you're going to have a lot of people talk and be in these meetings, and then they're going to come to you and say, hey, we need all of this. And then it's up to you to say we could do it or we can't, depending on the deadline. You need to know exactly what is doable in that given moment for the deadline that you're given, and whether you have the resources to complete this feature with what is being asked. So if you look here, token validation and password update, right? Seems pretty straightforward. Abuse prevention and observability. So what this means is this is all security, all right? So like if I was to click on the forgot password link and then go through the flow multiple times with a particular email address, is there a way to prevent me from doing it multiple times? And this is where the rate limiting that this document outlines comes into play. And that is the security here. So this will prevent any user from abusing resetting their password or attempting to do that, because that could be a way to fish information from this feature, and you need to figure out ways to like monitor that traffic. So the observability portion of it is logging. So if you have logging and metrics around that, you could trace what's going on and who's doing what when they shouldn't do it. okay? And then this all gets fired, or this event happens when the user clicks on that forgot password link. All right. So this is the basics of the scope of this feature for now. Now, what's out of scope? So this is where you need to think outside the box a little bit. If they want something to do with MFA authentication and your system not set up with MFA authentication yet, it's going to be a huge lift. You would define it as out of scope. Anything that is just borderline out of this world to do within a month's time that they need immediately, and it's only you working on the project. I can understand if you're working with multiple developers on this particular feature. You could probably have like two front end devs working on it and then like a back end dev, whatever the case may be. This might become in scope because you have more hands on deck. But say, for example, if you're only working on this on your own, then and the system is not set up for MFA, you should not be doing MFA. And you need to tell the product manager and the stakeholder, we can't do this. This has to be V2. Also, account blocking or unblocking. If you guys don't have a security feature already set up for this, obviously, you need to have a bigger conversation about that if this is the case. And then also username recovery. Is this already in the system? If it's not, then and it's a huge lift, you need to address that. Okay, so always think about what you're able to do in that given moment and then what you're able to live without to provide value for that given time. All right. And then talk to your product manager in terms of actually prioritizing these features for a next iteration that have another developer work on it, or maybe yourself. So, user experience and flows, right? User experience, this is where you would show a flow chart of what the user is going to be going through with this new feature. You don't have to necessarily do this, but from a technical standpoint, if you want others to understand exactly what the flow is, then this is something that you would probably do. So if I click this, this is going to take me to my flow. Okay. And I'm just going to zoom out a little bit so you guys can see. And this is my flow chart. All right. So if you're not familiar with flow charts, this is computer science 101. This is how you could document the flow of a feature, and you're breaking down the requirements into multiple pieces and you're understanding what the flow should be. So when you're building it, you should follow this pattern. So here we got the forgot password link. So this is where the flow starts. The user clicks on this link, submits their email address, then the system responds with a success, meaning that the email is valid, and then we check on the back end to see if the account actually exists. If it does not exist, we show an error, we route back to the login screen. All right. But if it does, it continues on with the flow. So there will be an email that will be sent to the user, and then there will be a reset link in that email so that the user clicks on it, it goes to a separate page with the one time token, and then it validates that token. The system validates the token, and then we check to see if the token is actually valid in this case, because there's multiple times where I could click on that link or I could send multiple emails and then click the one that was previous in my inbox, and that should invalidate the token for my account, right? It shouldn't work. So if the token is invalid, or if the token is valid in this case, then yes, we continue. If not, we're going to show an error and prompt to retry. So we need another reset email to be sent to that account with the new token. All right. And then it goes through this process again. If the token is valid, we continue here. Okay, so the user lands on the password page. What's going to happen next? So from there, you will have to input the new password. So it'll be the new password, and you need to confirm that password. Based on the password policy or the security of that password, it needs to have alphanumeric characters, also some symbols, and the length of that password could be more than 7 in this case. If it passes that, if password is valid, yes, continue with updating the password, invalidate the token for single use, right? So like the user can't use that token anymore, and then return a confirmation message that tells the user that their login or their password has been updated and allows them to re-log in at the start. Okay. So this is your flow. Pretty straightforward. I think this is helpful for new devs to kind of document the flow, or if this is a more complex feature it makes sense to create like a flow chart just to understand exactly what the flow is and how to break the different problems down into smaller pieces so you can implement a solution, right? So that's the flow chart. Edge cases. So this is something that could happen if it's not caught, that could pose a security risk or cause issues with accounts being able to reset their password. So if the token expired and the user is prompted to request a new one and it doesn't work, that's something to look into. If the token was reused and then the token does not get rejected, that's something to look into as well. So these are the different edge cases that you need to think about when you're dealing with like tokens and passwords and accounts. Invalid tokens, there should be a generic error. Email provider or outage. If there's an outage with that email provider, how do you respond to that? Is there like a fallback message? Excessive attempts. So if you're dealing with like request rate limiting, you can set that up as well. Another thing that is very important with this documentation too is the API routes, right? So like you have to define your API routes to show exactly what the flow is going to be. If you look here, the route is just plain text, right? You don't really know what you're going to be doing here. But then if you want to show exactly what the request of that API route is going to be and what the actual response types are, this is something that you should document. Okay. Also, when you're resetting it, what is the request for the token and the new password? How is the system going to validate whether that password can be reset for that account based on the token that is being sent to the backend? There are so many different ways you could document this to show how we're going to be handling all these different edge cases here, right? So this is how you would set everything up. You show the responses, all the different types of responses that can happen with this flow. Also, any mitigations, right? So one of the big things is if you're not ready to show this to every single user out there in your customer base, the one thing you could do is set up a feature flag. All right. You could use Launch Darkly. There's a lot of other free ones out there if you don't have the funds for that. But you could set up a feature flag to hide everything that is this feature, and you could actually deploy it in production until you're ready to turn on that flag for everybody else to use, right? So you can have the basic password reset feature versus this one is more detailed and it has more validation checks and all that stuff and more flows. You could turn on that feature flag to show that link to go through the next flow. UI messaging fallbacks, ability to rotate token secrets. So like how do you rotate secrets for each user account so that there's no conflict? And then any security considerations here, right? So this is very detailed. This will, if you're proposing this, this is what people want to see. That you thought of every possible scenario that this could fail and some of the key requirements that is important for this feature to succeed. All right. So tokens, you have to understand how to use tokens, right? Is it single use, hashed? Does it expire every 30 minutes? Like, what is the time set there? Prevent account enumeration, return identical responses. Like all of these different things are very important. Rate limiting applied. How are you going to rate limit using that workflow? Is it going to be per IP or is it going to be by email address? These are the things that you need to think about. And then password validation flows, like does it match your current security policy for the company? If this is not the case, then you need to update that. If you don't have any of these important requirements mapped out, you could run into like a big security issue. It's not fun to deal with. And then you have to refactor things and figure things out. It's not fun. So like observability and monitoring, I think this is the most important because you want to see who's doing what, when did this account get reset? If it wasn't that particular user doing the reset, how do you figure out who did what? So having metrics around the request, the email sent to the user, keeping logs of that. If it was successful, if it failed, there was a bounce back because of the email. These are all the things that are important to make sure that you have logging around so that you could easily fix issues when they come up. Okay. And then any alerts. So you could set up your environment to alert on these issues depending on the severity of it. So if there's a spike in reset failures, there should be an alert that you get that there are 10 failures in like 5 seconds or something like that. Then you can look at some of the metadata, like the IP address, the email address that's associated with that account, see if that account is compromised. And if it is, disable that account, reach out to the customer, and go through the next steps of creating a new account or just resetting the password. All right. So, email delivery failures, all that stuff, you should keep a log of that. And then unusual request volume. So, if you're getting a lot of volume in seconds and it's by different IPs and different countries and all that stuff, that's something that you should log as well. And that will tell you the bigger picture of what's going on. So, by you defining your documentation in these steps, now you have look at the bad documentation example of what you need to build, which is pretty straightforward, and you could create stories off this, versus this good example, which outlines every single piece of this requirement that needs to get done and what's actually in scope and what's important. This tells me the entire picture of what needs to be done, as opposed to this. This is just all summary and notes. Think about writing your documentation in this way. This will save you so much time if you put in the work to put all the requirements and break down exactly what needs to be done. To then see it outlined like this, you already know what you need to do. All you need now is to create stories off of all of these different sections. And now you have a full fledged project that you could work on and be confident that you could finish. All right. So, this is why documentation is very important. If you get into the cadence of understanding what the requirements are for your project, having those open communication with your product manager stakeholders to figure out what we need to do, and then from there, from a company standpoint, put everything together. You can actually use AI to give you an outline of what the document should look like, take bits and pieces of it that make sense to you, and now you have something that you could work with, right? So this is why I'm advocating for you guys to work on your documentation skills, because this will save you so much time in building features in the long run. Now, if you need help with documenting or just reviewing your code, you could reach out to me. There's a link in the description that you could schedule a one-on-one with me for 15 minutes, and we could see if we could work together, and we could schedule calls later down the line. But this is something that you guys need to start implementing into your flow. All right. So that's it, guys. That's the video. If you like this video, please like, share, subscribe. Let me know, are you guys actually writing documentation? And if not, what is holding you back from writing good documentation? And did this example help you to kind of see how to write things? Okay, because the more you start to develop on features, you want to go with this. It doesn't have to be super detailed, like I said, but it at least needs to have a flow to it and explains exactly what you need to do. All right, talk soon.